Very good afternoon to you on this 22nd day of Level 4 lockdown in South Africa. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. Today's Eucharist readings, again, we have a passage from the book of Acts, chapter 18, and we've returned to John's Gospel as well. But in Acts 18, we come across Paul in Corinth with the group that is with him. Paul always made the effort of going first and foremostly to the Jewish community in any town or city to share with them what God was doing within the context of the Jewish faith and to share Jesus as Messiah, the good news of that. Many times that message wasn't greeted with much joy, and it appears that Corinth similarly was a place where that was initially rejected. And we see Paul in this context being hauled before the local magistrate by the Jewish leaders of the city. Interestingly, the Jewish magistrate casting it out of court, refusing to actually deal with it, and the community having to continue to grapple with what Paul was sharing. Ultimately, Corinth embraced the message that Paul brought. Partly it was because eventually it was the Gentile community, it was the non-Jews in the community who welcomed that. Now, I find it easy to be quite judgmental from where I sit in terms of the way that the early Jewish communities responded to the good news of Jesus as Messiah, as the Christ. But when I reflect on it, I think that very often I'm tempted to respond similarly to the way those Jewish communities did. When one is presented with a new insight, a new way of doing things, something that radically comes in and changes the nature of how we see life, certainly my response often is very reactive and negatively reactive to those things. I'm hoping over time I'm becoming more aware of who I am and that process within me. It's certainly much easier if one is aware. It bypasses a whole lot of the heartache that gets created when we just kind of explode around things. But life is complex. We hold to traditions, we hold to ways of doing things that have made sense over sometimes long periods of time. And when suddenly those things don't work anymore, it's tempting to just react sometimes quite explosively to them. Certainly this time of lockdown has pushed many of us, and certainly pushed myself, into doing things differently because there has been no other choice. I found embracing the virtual world on one level hugely difficult, but on another level it's been wonderfully exciting, and have learned and continue to learn a whole lot of new skills, and discovering that there are gifts in the virtual environment that enable worship, pastoral care, counseling and things to continue in fact a meaningful way. And although we cannot meet physically as we have been used to doing, somehow getting together, even if it is on the screen, there is an ability in that space to still feel united despite living apart and being in different places. Someone like Paul had the courage to persevere. I think he had a particularly strong personality on that kind of level. And what's useful is looking back and seeing that in a place like Corinth that initially was so anti the message of what God was doing in their time, a Christian community developed eventually there. If you read through 1 and 2 Corinthians, the letters to 1 and 2 Corinthians in the New Testament, you'll see that it was never an easy community. But in the midst of the antagonisms and other things that were going on, it's the passage of 1 Corinthians 13 that is a gift from Corinth. Paul, in dealing with all the arguments and discontent, eventually says, let me tell you what this is all about. And we have that wonderful passage in 1 Corinthians 13 on love. Love is patient, love is kind, etc. And so a challenge, I think, to us, that when we're feeling uncomfortable because of new things that are happening, is it God's work, or is our discomfort due to our own unwillingness to embrace what God is doing in our time and in our world.